High Warlord Drakon Vorath had conquered 47 systems. He had never lost a war. The room smelled like coffee and old metal. That was the wrong detail, the one thing that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Not the planet hanging blue and green outside the viewport. Not the human woman sitting across from him, both hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic cup as if she'd forgotten he was there. The smell. His war chamber smelled of incense and political certainty. This room smelled like a break room on a freighter. There were scuff marks on the walls. Someone had taped a faded photograph near the door, a man and a woman standing in front of what looked like an ocean. The tape had yellowed. No one had taken it down. Vorath's neural crown flickered. The conquest tally it displayed, a running count of systems, worlds, populations absorbed into the Dominion, had gone dark on its own. He didn't know when. He hadn't noticed. The human woman hadn't spoken in 6 minutes. She poured nothing into the cup. It was already full. She just held it, and the steam rose in a slow thread, and she watched the planet below with the patient expression of someone who had been watching for a very long time. His mandibles clicked once. She didn't look up. Vorath had reduced 47 worlds to silence. He had sat across from kings in their own throne rooms, watched empires beg through translators, heard the particular pitch of a species discovering that their weapons didn't work and their surrender had already been filed. He had never been the one sitting in the wrong chair. Outside the viewport, Earth turned. Blue. Green. Quiet. As if nothing had happened. As if 11 minutes ago the largest military engagement in the planet's recorded history had not simply ended. The woman set the cup down. The ceramic made a soft sound against the table. She looked at him for the first time. "You asked for a demonstration," she said. Her voice was flat, and even the way ground gets flat after water has been running over it for a very long time. "We gave you one." She reached for the cup again. Lifted it. Held it out toward him across the table. He did not take it. "It wasn't about us," she said. "It was about you." She pressed a single key on the console beside her. The transmission light went green. And whatever she had just said went out on an open channel to every receiver in the Zarvati homeworld. The chipped cup stayed on the table between them, cooling in the silence. "You'll want to hear how this ends. Trust me on that." 4 weeks earlier, it had been Ensign James Park who saw it first. He was on his third coffee of the watch and thinking about Mars, specifically about the message he owed his girlfriend that he still hadn't written when the Kuiper boundary sensor flagged a crossing. She was reading an intelligence report and eating cold oatmeal, which was what she did every morning at 400 hours regardless of whether anything was happening, and for 31 years, nothing had been happening. He stared at the number for a moment, then he stared at it again. "Ma'am," he said. Fleet Admiral Sarah Wren did not look up, and so the habit had solidified into something that felt more like geology than routine. "Kuiper boundary crossing," Park said. 2,300 ships. The spoon stopped. How long until Sol perimeter? 4 weeks, ma'am. Maybe 5. Wren set the spoon down. She looked at the report in her hand, not at Park, not at the screen, and her expression didn't change. Then she reached for the ceramic mug beside her tray. Pale gray glaze, a hairline crack running from the rim toward the handle. The letters on the side had faded to near nothing over 14 years, but she knew what they said. Her daughter had given it to her on a Tuesday. There had been wrapping paper. There had been a card that said the same thing the mug said, "World's okayest admiral." She held the mug for a moment. "Wake Operation Stillwater," she said. She set the mug down. The ceramic was warm against her palm, the only warmth in the room. She would not pick it up again until the silence was over. Operation Stillwater had 4 rules. They were not written anywhere. They had never needed to be. The first rule: no transmissions, no emergency alerts, no tight beam signals, no automated responses. The Zarvathi had been watching Sol for 287 years. If they had heard anything unusual, they would have come sooner. The second rule: the fleet was not a fleet until it needed to be. 53 warships had been sitting in the mass shadow of Jupiter for longer than some Earth nations had existed. They ran cold, they ran dark, and every crew rotation happened via single-occupant shuttle in the middle of solar weather events that made sensors unreliable. The third rule: nothing looked like what it was. The orbital emplacements the Zarvathi had catalogued as weather satellites were not weather satellites. They had never been weather satellites, but they had transmitted weather data for 287 years with complete accuracy. Because the engineering team that built them had decided that if they were going to be a cover story, they might as well be a good one. The fourth rule was the only rule that mattered. Patience was not weakness. It was the only weapon that had never failed. Commander Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway of the briefing room. He was a tall man going gray at the temples, and his left hand was silver from the wrist down, a prosthetic he'd had since the border engagement 19 years ago. He had spent those 19 years in the fleet and had never once asked to be reassigned somewhere safer. "The council transmission arrived," he said. 22 minutes ago. Elder Tellys forwarded it. I know. The High Warlord is announcing first contact in. I know, Marcus. Webb stopped. He looked at her, then at the mug on the table, then back at her. "You're not going to eat the rest of that oatmeal, are you?" "No." He pulled out a chair and sat down. Captain Sophia Reyes came in behind him and stood at the wall because there was no other chair, which was fine because she rarely sat during briefings anyway. She had a photograph pinned to the breast pocket of her jacket, a face, smiling, that no one asked about anymore. Lieutenant Sora Delara slipped in last, holding her own coffee mug in both hands, and tapped it twice with her index finger before she spoke. She always did that. No one had ever asked why. "Intel says they're coming in formation," Delara said. "Full conquest array, ceremonial. They want it to look like the 48th. They want the council watching," Reyes said. "They want everyone watching," Ren said. She stood up. She didn't look at the viewport. She'd stopped watching the stars the way other people did years ago. She looked at the report on her desk. Elder Tellys had filed that report 287 years ago. It was 47 pages long. The Zarvathi Intelligence Division had archived it under Agricultural Species, Priority 4. No one had read past page 3. She picked it up. She turned to page 4. Page 4 said, "Do not assume that absence of signal means absence of preparation. These organisms have demonstrated an unusual cultural relationship with deferred action. They do not respond to threats, they absorb them. I recommend full strategic analysis before any engagement." Page 4 had been filed 287 years ago. No one had read page 4. She set it back down. "Fleet status," she said. "All 53 ships reporting in," Webb said. "Cold and ready. Mines are armed and waiting on the trigger line." "Good." She straightened her jacket, not because it needed straightening, but because her hands needed something to do. "Give the Zarvathi 4 weeks to feel certain, and then..." She picked up the oatmeal, looked at it, put it down again. "Then we correct the math," she said. 17 light hours away, in the war chamber aboard the Immortal Resolve, High Warlord Dracon Vorath reviewed the approach vectors and felt nothing but confirmation. The Bleak Hall had been carved from obsidian shipped from Velkath, the 6th world he had personally conquered. Back when he was young enough, that conquest still felt like an achievement rather than an administrative process. The chamber ceiling rose 300 meters above the floor, all crystal, and through it the stars were cold and close and numerous. Incense burned in the old brass columns along the walls. The smell of it had been the same smell for 2,500 years, in one form or another, the particular combination of resins that the Dominion's original founders had chosen for war councils, and that no one had changed because no one had found a reason to. His neural crown displayed the tally. 47. It floated in soft amber numerals just outside his peripheral vision. The world below, the pale blue one rotating in the tactical display, was listed in the Dominion's files as Sol the 3, Priority 4, Agricultural Classification Non-Threatening, 9 billion inhabitants, 12 orbital platforms. A handful of deep space probes that had gone silent some years ago, presumably decommissioned. General Tharkes stood at the tactical table and pointed at the orbital map with one claw. "Their defense signature is minimal," Tharkes said. 12 platforms, 3 of which appear non-functional based on thermal imaging. "We read no weapons-grade energy signatures anywhere in the system." Vorath's secondary eyes drifted to the Mavari elder standing near the wall. The old creature had been granted observer status by the council, which was the polite way of saying he was allowed to be present without being allowed to speak unless spoken to. He was 478 years old by his own species count. He stood very still and he did not look at the tactical display. He looked at Vorath. "Elder Tellys?" Vorath said, "You filed a report about this species." 287 years ago, the elder said. His voice was the kind of quiet that had given up trying to be loud. "It was archived. Your species was also archived," Vorath said. "Mavari extinct in all but memory. The council's designation. He turned back to the display. You filed a 47-page document that our intelligence division reviewed in full. Tilly said nothing. His hands folded in front of him and stayed there. We reviewed it, Vorath said, and his mandibles clicked once, the closest he came to a smile. They will kneel within 5 of our minutes. The elder looked at the floor. The fleet moved toward Sol. At Meridian Anchor, the lights went to red at 0312 hours, not emergency red, operational red, the distinction being purely semantic when you were sitting 40,000 kilometers above a planet that was about to have a very difficult morning. The corridor lights shifted and Webb appeared at the door of the operations center with his silver hand already on his comm unit. Kuipernet is tracking the advance formation, he said. They've dropped to approach speed. Weapons are hot. They're not hiding it. They've never needed to hide anything, Ren said. She was standing at the viewport. Earth was below, the Pacific enormous and silver in the local night, scattered lights along the coastlines like dropped sparks. 9 billion people down there who did not know that the next 11 minutes were going to determine the next several centuries. She had thought about that on and off for most of her adult life. She'd stopped trying to make it feel smaller. Admiral, Delara's voice from the sensor station. Advanced scouts just crossed the 1.2 AU marker. They're inside Jupiter's orbit. Ren nodded. They had seeded the mines during trade missions, actual trade missions, with actual cargo manifests and actual customs inspectors who checked everything on the list. The orbital emplacements had been built over 40 years by a construction program officially classified as atmospheric monitoring infrastructure. The Zarvati observers who visited the Sol system during those years had noted the activity and filed it under Agricultural World Improving Climate Capacity, which was the sort of thing that happened to primitive worlds and was not worth additional investigation. No one had investigated. How long until the advance formation reaches the mine perimeter? She said. 12 minutes, Webb said. She nodded again. 12 minutes. Then the math would change, and the Zarvati Dominion would discover that 47 was the wrong number, and that 287 years of patience had a shape, and the shape had been waiting inside Jupiter's shadow for a very long time. She looked at the mug on the console beside her. Cold now, she hadn't touched it since the alert came in. Soon, at minute 12, the Sol system stopped being quiet. The mines went first. That was always how Operation Stillwater had been designed. Not with a declaration, not with a warning shot, not with the kind of formal military signal that the Zarvati Dominion's protocols required before engagement. They had never once pinged as weapon systems because the trigger was passive, no active signal, no power signature. Just the mines, in a pattern that the Zarvati advance formation had been sailing through for the past 4 hours without knowing it. 1,800 emplacements. The Zarvati had catalogued them as weather satellites for 287 years. Nothing to detect until the moment a Zarvati hull crossed a threshold that had been calculated 40 years ago by a woman who had since died in her own bed at the age of 91 and left very specific instructions about where to scatter her ashes. The threshold was crossed at DO 324 hours, Sol time. Webb said Mark into his comm unit. Very quietly, the way you say something you have been waiting a long time to say. On the tactical display, 432 Zarvati ships went from green to yellow to red in the space of about 8 seconds. Some of them simply stopped. Some of them listed sideways and began drifting. Aboard the Immortal Resolve, General Tharkes watched the formation display fracture and said nothing for 4 full seconds, which was 4 seconds longer than he had ever taken to respond to anything in his military career. High Warlord, his voice came out flat. The advance formation, I can see it, Vorath said. The debris field is, I can see it. The display was not supposed to look like that. Tharkes had run 23 planetary assault engagements in his career. He had never seen a formation shatter before the engagement formally began. The Zarvati doctrine on first contact military action was specific. The approach species panics, fires ineffectually, sustains losses, and either surrenders or is absorbed by force. The doctrine had a 2,500-year success record. It did not have a protocol for this. Vorath's secondary eyes moved to the tactical map. The debris field was spreading across the Sol system's inner plane in a pattern that was, and this was the wrong word, but it was the only word that fit, deliberate. The mines had not detonated randomly. They had detonated in a sequence, and the sequence had cut the Zarvathi formation into thirds, separating the flagship group from the flanking wings with a precision that implied someone had known in advance exactly how the Dominion standard approach vectors worked, which they had for 287 years. Continue advance, Vorath said. We have 2,000 ships remaining. In the operations center at Meridian Anchor, Wren watched the same display and did not allow herself to feel anything yet. Webb had a list. He always had a list. It was handwritten on actual paper, which was an affectation he developed after the border engagement that had cost him his hand, something about the tactility of it, the way you couldn't accidentally delete a pen line. He read from it in a low voice, crossing things off. Round 1 complete. Mines at 87% depletion. We'll have some coverage left, but not much. Formation is fractured. Flagship group is pressing forward. He looked up. They're not retreating. They won't, Wren said. They've never retreated from a first contact engagement. The doctrine doesn't permit it. Good, said Captain Reyes from the wall. At the sensor station, Delara tapped her mug twice and pulled up the formation track. Flagship group is at, she paused, recalculated, 11 minutes from Jupiter's orbital plane. 11 minutes. Wren picked up a stylus from the console, turned it over once in her fingers, set it back down. That was all. Then she keyed the fleet comm, Stillwater actual to all units. You are clear to move. 53 ships had been waiting in the cold and the dark for longer than most living species counted as a generation. The crews had rotated, the command structures had updated, reorganized, updated again. The youngest officer currently serving aboard the Calderon, the fleet's lead tactical ship, a vessel that looked from the outside like a hollowed-out asteroid, because that was exactly what it was, had been born 11 years after the previous youngest officer had retired. The fleet had outlived careers and marriages, and in 4 cases the children of people who had helped build it. Captain Yusuf Okafor was 47 years old, and had spent 22 of those years aboard a ship that wasn't officially a ship. He had a photograph in his quarters of his mother, who had served the same post before him, who had told him when he was 6 years old that the most important thing a soldier could do was wait for the right moment and not mistake the wrong one for it. He had thought about that sentence approximately once a month for the past 22 years. He thought about it now. All units confirm, his comm officer said. We're green across the board. Take us out, Okafor said. From the Zarvathi flagship's tactical display, they would have appeared to materialize, not because they were using cloaking technology, which they weren't, but because the mass shadow of Jupiter had made them invisible to every sensor the Dominion used. 53 ships came out of Jupiter's shadow simultaneously in a pincer formation that had been rehearsed in silence for 287 years. And the Dominion had never thought to look there because nothing in their 2,500-year history of conquest had ever suggested that a species would hide its entire military capacity behind a gas giant and wait. They had never conquered a species that chose to wait. The human fleet moved in patterns the Zarvathi doctrine had no names for. Not because the tactics were impossibly advanced, but because they were built around the specific geometries of the Sol system, around the debris fields the mines had created. At minute 24, the pincer closed. 600 Zarvathi ships were rendered combat ineffective in the first 7 minutes of contact, around the exact formation behavior that Zarvathi doctrine mandated when a flagship group came under fire. The humans had been studying that doctrine for 287 years. They knew it better than most Zarvathi generals did. Tharkas's tactical display was showing him things his mind was refusing to process. How many ships? Vorath said, very quietly. 53, Tharkas said. The number sat in the air of the bleak hall for a moment. 53, Vorath said again. Yes, High Warlord. We cataloged 12 orbital platforms, 9 billion agricultural beings. No weapons-grade signatures in the system. He turned to look at Tharkas directly, all 3 sets of eyes. Where did 53 warships come from? Tharkas did not have an answer. He had never not had an answer. He had served the Dominion for 61 years and had risen to general through a combination of tactical intelligence and the ability to rapidly synthesize incomplete information into actionable response. The tactical display in front of him was giving him complete information, and he could not synthesize it. They were already here, he said finally. They were already here. Before we arrived, Elder Tellys stood at the back of the bleak hall and watched and did not speak. He had been 191 years old then, and the writing had taken him 6 months, and he had titled it Preliminary Assessment, Sol 3, Agricultural Designation, Proposed Revision to Priority Classification, which was the driest title he had ever given anything. He had filed his report 287 years ago, because he had known that a dry title was the only kind that might survive the filing process long enough to reach someone who mattered. It hadn't. He had accepted that long ago. He watched Vorath's mandibles click, twice, fast, the pattern that meant confusion being suppressed by pride, and said nothing. Page 4 had said, "Do not assume absence of signal means absence of preparation." Page 7 had said, "This species has a documented cultural tendency to absorb threat and respond asymmetrically. Recommend extended observation before any engagement attempt." Page 23 had said, "I believe this species is not weak. I believe it is patient. Those are not the same thing." No one had read page 23. At minute 42, the planetary shield network came online. The Zarvathi bombardment of Earth's surface had begun 11 minutes earlier, a standard suppression pattern designed to disable communication infrastructure and demonstrate overwhelming force before the ground-level capitulation demand. The energy output was significant. The Zarvathi had deployed this pattern against 31 different worlds. None of those worlds had built their weather satellites to redirect incoming fire. The reflection wasn't perfect. It wasn't meant to be. It was meant to be sufficient to take roughly 60% of the bombardment's energy and return it at an angle that intersected with the Zarvathi formation's current position. The targeting had been calculated based on the Dominion's standard suppression firing geometry, which again had been studied for 287 years. 300 ships caught the reflected fire. Most of them survived. None of them were functional afterward. In the bleak hall, something changed in Vorath's face. It was not fear. Vorath had been in enough battles to have burned most of his fear away decades ago. It was something older, and in some ways, worse. It was the first moment in 129 years that he did not know what was going to happen next. His neural crown flickered. The conquest tally, 47, in soft amber numerals went dark. Tharkas said nothing. There was nothing left to say that the display wasn't already saying. "Order a general withdrawal," Vorath said. "Fall back to the outer system. Regroup at the High Warlord." The comm officer's voice had a quality to it that Tharkas had never heard from her before, something that was close to what, in a human, you would have called apology. "The retreat corridor," she stopped. "Start it again. The retreat corridor is mine, sir. We're reading active emplacement signatures along the entire withdrawal vector. The formation we entered through," she looked at her screen. It was a funnel. "We came in through the open end. The open end." Vorath stood very still. "And the closed end," he said. 12 ships High Warlord, human vessels holding the perimeter, in perfect synchronization." She paused. "They've been there since before we arrived." The bleak hall was very quiet. Elder Tellys did not look at the floor this time. He looked at Vorath, not with satisfaction, nothing as small as that, with something that felt more like grief, the way it feels to be right about something you spent a long time hoping you were wrong about. Outside the crystal ceiling, the cold stars had not moved. They never moved. That was the one thing about the universe that never changed regardless of what happened beneath it. The stars held their positions, patient and enormous, burning in the dark with absolutely no interest in who won. At hour 4, Vorath stopped the clock. He gave the order he had never given. In 129 years of unbroken campaign, in 47 systems absorbed, in 2,500 years of Dominion history stretching back before he was born, no High Warlord of the Zarvathi had ever given this order in a first contact engagement. "Signal surrender," he said. "All units." The comm officer sent the signal. The immortal resolve drifted in Earth's orbit, its propulsion gone, its weapons cold, its formation, what remained of it scattered across 300,000 kilometers of space. The ship that had never stopped moving was stopped now. A human transmission came back within 30 seconds. 9 words. Tharkas read them off the display. His voice was very level. He was a soldier, and he would be level about this, even if it was the last level thing he ever managed. The Zarvathi Dominion ends here. Do not return. The silence that followed had a different weight from any silence that had come before it. This was not the silence of space or the silence of a war chamber between decisions. This was the silence of something ending. A 2,500-year sound that had been running so long that no one noticed it as sound anymore had just stopped. And in that stopped place, the only thing in the bleak hall that made any noise at all was the very faint, rhythmic click of Voreth's mandibles as they stilled, one at a time, and went quiet. The corridors of Meridian Anchor smelled like coffee. Voreth had expected what? He wasn't sure what he had expected. The processing centers of conquered worlds usually smelled like fear, which had a specific chemistry regardless of species. Or they smelled like the victors, which in the Dominion's case meant incense and warm metal. This smelled like a place where people worked, like the end of a long shift, like something had just been brewed in a room nearby and no one had gotten to it yet. His escort was 4 humans in gray uniforms. They were armed, but the weapons were holstered, and they walked at a pace that was, he needed a moment to identify it, consider it. They were walking at a pace that accounted for his leg configuration. One of them had glanced at his legs when he boarded and then quietly, without comment, adjusted the group's speed. That was wrong. That was the wrong detail. Winners did not adjust their pace for the conquered. The corridors were scuffed. There was a photograph taped near a door, a man and a woman, an ocean behind them. The tape yellowed at the edges. No one had taken it down. He passed 3 humans who pressed themselves against the wall to let the group through, and none of them looked at him with what he would have recognized as triumph. They looked at him the way people look at something they expected and are not surprised by. He had conquered 47 worlds. He knew what being looked at by victors felt like. This was different. This felt like being something that had already been accounted for. The door at the end of the corridor opened. The room beyond it smelled like coffee and old metal. Through the viewport, earth, blue and green, turning in the quiet way it always had. A woman sat at a table. She had gray in her hair, and she held a ceramic cup in both hands, chipped, pale gray, faded letters, and she did not look up when he came in. The chair across from her was empty. He sat down. 6 minutes passed before either of them spoke. Or rather, 6 minutes passed before she looked up. She didn't say anything when she did. She just looked at him the way you look at a sum you've already calculated, not discovering the answer, just confirming it. Voreth's neural crown was dark. He hadn't tried to reactivate it. The conquest tally had gone offline somewhere in the 3rd hour of the engagement, and he had not looked at it since. He was aware that this was the longest he had gone without checking it in 31 years. Outside, Earth turned. The room was very still. Webb was not in it. There was a single communications officer at a station near the wall, young, sitting very straight. Reyes was not in it, not looking at either of them, and otherwise it was just the woman, and the table, and the cup, and the planet below, and the particular quality of silence that happens when everyone who might fill it has already decided not to. Voreth's mandibles were still. He had sat across from kings. He had taken their surrender in rooms that were built to overwhelm, carved from conquest stone, lit for dominance, staffed with witnesses whose job was to remember the exact expression on a ruler's face when the moment came. He had designed those rooms. He understood what they were for. This room had scuff marks on the walls. At minute 8, she poured nothing into the cup. It was already full. She just shifted her grip and the steam rose in a slow thread, and she watched the planet below with the specific patience of someone who had spent a long time watching things and did not find it difficult. At minute 9, he said, "You knew our approach vectors." She didn't answer immediately. She turned the cup slightly in her hands. "We knew your doctrine," she said. "For how long?" "Long enough." He processed that. The mines, the shield network, the fleet position. He watched her face. "You built all of that before we arrived." "We built all of that," she said. "Before you decided to arrive." There was a distinction in that sentence. He sat with it. At minute 11, she set the cup down. Reached for the console beside her. Pressed a key. The transmission light went green. "You asked for a demonstration," she said. Her voice was flat and clear, and it went out on an open channel to every receiver in the Zarvathi homeworld. "We gave you one. But it wasn't about us." She looked at him, just looked. "It was about you." She lifted the cup, held it out toward him across the table. He did not take it. She set it back down. The ceramic made a soft sound. The transmission light was still green. Whatever had just been said was already traveling at light speed toward a homeworld that had 2,500 years of certainty and was about to have considerably less. He said, "You're not going to threaten us. No. You're not going to demand terms. The terms are already stated." He thought about the 9 words. The Zarvathi Dominion ends here. Do not return. He had never heard a surrender demand that short. The Dominion's standard capitulation documents ran to 340 pages. That's it, he said. That's it, she said. He sat with that too. The cup was between them on the table. The coffee in it had gone untouched for 11 minutes. Steam was no longer rising. Commander Webb found Elder Tellys in the observation corridor on Deck 7, standing at the long window that faced Earth. The old Mavari had his hands folded in front of him, and he was doing what he had been doing in every room he'd been in for the past 6 hours, watching and saying nothing. The council session starts in 20 minutes, Webb said. The Admiral wants you there. Telly said nothing. Elder Webb tried again. You filed the original report. She wants the council to hear that from you. Telly's hands stayed folded. His eyes pale. The color of old bone did not move from the viewport. I filed 2 reports, he said. Webb stopped. The first was 287 years ago, Telly said. The second was filed 14 months ago, when the Zarvati Dominion added Sol to its active expansion list. I titled it Addendum, Sol 3. Final assessment, he paused. It was 3 pages long. I had learned to be brief. Webb looked at him. What did it say? Page 1. The first report was correct. The species has not changed its posture. Page 2. If the Dominion proceeds, the engagement will last less than half a day, and the outcome will not favor the Dominion. Page 3. He stopped. Page 3, Webb said. Page 3 said the greater danger is not the engagement itself. The greater danger is what the other 1,200 species in the Galactic Council will do when they see a Priority 4 agricultural classification defeat the Dominion in 11 minutes, because that is the number the universe will remember, not the ships, not the mines. The time. He finally turned from the window. 14 months ago I filed that. No one read it. Webb was quiet for a moment. What do you think will happen? With the council? Tellys looked at him with the specific expression of someone who has been right about too many things to take satisfaction in being right about one more. Every species in that chamber, he said, has been afraid of the Dominion for somewhere between 80 and 900 years. Tonight they watched a Priority 4 world end a 200 and 500-year empire in less time than it takes to eat a meal. He looked back at the window. They will not celebrate. They will recalculate. That is what afraid species do when the thing they feared turns out to be afraid of something else. He was quiet for a moment. Page 3 also said, the humans will not want an empire. They will want to be left alone. The council will not understand this for some time. He turned from the window. 20 minutes, you said. Yes, then let's not be late. The Galactic Council chamber on the observation station quorum had 1,200 seats, and on most days, about 400 occupied ones, because full attendance was rare and most routine sessions ran on proxy votes. Tonight, every seat was filled. Several species had sent double delegations, which was technically a procedural violation, but the session chair had decided that tonight was not the night to argue about seating. Wren was not there. Wren was still at Meridian Anchor, at the table with the mug and the viewport. She had sent Webb in her place, with a data package and a single instruction. Play the transmission, then let Telly speak. Webb played the transmission. 9 words, flat voice. Clear channel. The chamber was absolutely silent for the 11 seconds it took to play. Then Webb said, Elder Tellys of the Mavari will now speak. Telly stood. He was 478 years old, and he had been sitting in the back of rooms for most of that time, which gave him a particular quality when he finally stood up, the quality of something that had not been hurrying and had therefore arrived exactly where it meant to. I filed a warning 287 years ago, he said. Page 3 contained one sentence that I will read now, because it is the only sentence that matters tonight. He held up a thin data card. He had kept a physical copy. He had kept it for 287 years. The sentence is, this species does not respond to threats, it absorbs them, and when it chooses to respond, it will not be in a language the Dominion has a word for. He set the card down. That language, he said, is patience, 287 years of it. You have all just watched the translation. He sat down. The chamber did not erupt. No one cheered. No one made the sounds that large groups of species make when attention breaks. What happened instead was a very specific quality of silence, the kind that means everyone in a room has simultaneously recalculated something and is sitting with the new number. The session chair, a Farathi, blue-shelled, 200 years old, looked at the data feed from Sol System on her console. She looked at the vote queue her system was showing her. She cleared her throat. "The council will now consider," she said carefully, "a motion to revise the classification of Sol 3. She did not say what the new classification should be. She didn't need to." Back on Meridian Anchor, in the operations center that smelled like coffee and old engine grease, Lieutenant Delara tapped her mug twice. "Admiral," she said, "we're getting a signal from the Calderon. Put it through." Captain Okafor's voice came on. Very level, the voice of a man who had been waiting 22 years for something and was now choosing his first words about it with care. "Stillwater actual," he said. "All units accounted for. We have some hull damage. The Renard took a hit in round 2. Crew is fine, she'll need a dock. The rest are clean." A pause. "Admiral, we've been out here a long time." "I know," Wren said. "Permission to come home." She looked at the viewport. Earth was still there. It was always still there. "Granted," she said. "Good work, Captain. Tell your people I said so." "Yes, ma'am." Another pause, shorter. "Ma'am, my mother was on this ship before me. She used to say, I know what she used to say," Wren said. She was right. The line closed. Webb came back in from the council session with the look on his face of a man who has just watched something he will describe to people for the rest of his life and still won't quite get right. "The vote's going to be unanimous," he said. "Or close to it. There are 14 holdouts, but—" He stopped. "What's Vorath doing?" Wren looked at the observation deck door. Through the small window in it, she could see the High Warlord still sitting at the table, still looking at the mug she'd left between them, still very still. "Thinking," she said. "About what?" She considered. "About what it costs," she said, to be certain. What Vorath was actually thinking about was his father. His father had been a general before him, and his father's father before that, and the line ran back far enough that no one in the family kept precise count anymore, because at a certain point the counting becomes less about history and more about weight. He had grown up in rooms that smelled of incense and old conquest, and he had been told in various forms the same sentence his entire life. The strong take, the weak endure, and the universe sorts the rest. He had believed it. He had built 129 years of his life on it. The cup on the table was cold now. The woman had not come back for it. She had left it there, between where she'd been sitting and where he was. He did not know if that was deliberate. He suspected it was. He was starting to suspect that very few things this species did were accidental. They had known his approach vectors. They had known his doctrine. They had studied him for 287 years without sending a single signal, without making a single aggressive move, without once giving him a reason to look more carefully at a world he had filed as agricultural and moved on. The strong take, the weak endure. He had never stopped to ask what happened when something that looked weak had simply been choosing not to take. His mandibles clicked once, then went still. The conquest tally on his neural crown stayed dark. He didn't reach for it. For the first time in 31 years, he found he didn't particularly want to know what it said. The escort came for Vorath an hour later. Not the same 4 guards. Different ones, older from the look of them, people who had been doing this work long enough that they didn't need to arrange their faces into anything. They simply appeared at the door and waited. One of them gestured toward the corridor, not unkindly. Vorath stood. He was stiff. His carapace had been designed for war chambers, not human chairs, and the hour of sitting had found every seam in his ceremonial armor. He straightened anyway. He would walk out of this room the way he had walked into every room for 129 years, upright, deliberate, unhurried. The cup was still on the table. He looked at it for a moment. The letters were almost gone, worn down to shadows on the ceramic. He could make out the shape of the words, but not the words themselves. Just the impression of something that had been written and used and kept long past the point where it still read clearly. He walked out. In the corridor on deck 3, they passed a young ensign going the other way. A human, early 20s, carrying a data tablet and walking too fast the way people do when they've just gotten good news and haven't decided what to do with their body about it. He had to flatten himself against the wall to let the group pass, and for a moment Vorath was close enough to see his face clearly. The ensign wasn't looking at him. He was reading something on the tablet, a message, from the shape of the display, and he was smiling the private kind of smile that belongs to something personal, nothing to do with wars or councils or the end of empires. Vorath walked on. The corridors of Meridian Anchor smelled like coffee. That was still true. That was still, somehow, the thing his mind kept returning to. He had visited 47 worlds in the process of absorbing them, and not one of them had smelled like this at the moment of their surrender. They had smelled like fear, or like fires, or like the particular chemical release that different species produced under extreme duress. This smelled like a break room, like someone's Tuesday, he thought. They were not afraid of us. Not in the way the other 46 had been afraid. Not in the way that changed the chemistry of the air. He had never, in 129 years, considered what it meant to face a species that had looked at his dominion and his doctrine and his 2,500 years of certainty and had simply decided to outlast it. The escort reached the bay where his transport was docked. The lead guard stopped and turned, not blocking the door, but simply present, and said something brief in Galactic Common about coordinates and escort protocol that Vorath processed without particularly hearing. He boarded. Back in the operations center, Admiral Wren ate cold oatmeal. The bowl had been sitting on her desk since 04Ts, and it was now 9:37, and she had not touched it since she set down the spoon 5.5 hours ago. She picked up the spoon now. The oatmeal had gone thick and gray and entirely beyond saving, which was fine. She ate it anyway, standing at her desk, reading the preliminary council session notes that Webb had forwarded. Not sitting, she rarely sat when she was reading, just standing. Spoon in one hand, datapad in the other, eating bad cold oatmeal the way she had eaten bad cold oatmeal on significant mornings for most of her adult life. It was not a ritual. She would have said, if asked, that it was simply what she did, which was the truest way she knew to describe something that had become so integrated into her thinking process that separating it from thinking was no longer possible. The mug was on the table in the observation room where she'd left it. Webb knocked and came in. "Council votes in," he said. He looked at the oatmeal. He had the practiced expression of someone who had worked for this person long enough to have opinions he had learned not to express. "They want a statement. I know. The session chair is asking whether Earth intends to. I know what she's asking." Wren set down the spoon. She set down the datapad. She looked at the wall for a moment, not at anything on it, just at the wall. The way you look at something neutral when you're choosing words carefully. "Draft this exactly." Webb held up his pad. She spoke. The statement went out to the Galactic Council at 0941 hours, and it was read into the session record by the session chair in the particular careful voice of someone handling something they haven't seen before and want to get right. To the Galactic Council, from Fleet Admiral Sarah Wren, Earth Defense Fleet. We did not fight this war to expand. We fought it to not be absorbed. Those are different things, and we ask the Council to note the difference carefully. We have no claims on Zarvathi territory. We have no claims on any territory. We have claims on our own. That is all we have ever had, and all we intend to keep. No celebration, no monument, no demand. We ask only to be left alone, which is what we have been asking, in the only language that was ever going to be heard for 287 years. The chamber was quiet for the length of time it took 1,200 delegations to absorb this. Then the vote opened. 387 to 14. Earth's classification was revised from Priority 4 to Priority 1. Not a military designation, a diplomatic one, the category that meant, this species will be consulted before anything in their region is decided. The category that, in 2,500 years of Council history, had never before been assigned to a species that hadn't asked for it. The 14 holdouts were Zarvathi-aligned systems that had not yet understood that Zarvathi alignment was now a different kind of thing than it had been yesterday. They would understand within 90 days. The Zarvathi dominion did not fall because Earth conquered it. That was the part that the Council's historians would spend decades trying to explain accurately and mostly failing, because the human concept they needed, the myth was the structure, didn't have a clean translation in most Galactic Common dialects. What happened was simpler. 47 systems had been held by the belief that the Dominion could not be beaten. When the Dominion was beaten, the systems recalculated. They recalculated quickly, because 2,500 years of certainty about who was strongest does precise things to the political arrangements underneath it, and when you remove the certainty, the arrangements that depended on it have nothing to stand on. The first rebellion was in the Velketh system. The sixth world Vorath had personally conquered, the one he'd taken the obsidian from. It lasted 4 days before the local garrison stood down. By the end of 90 days, it was done. Earth sent no ships. Earth sent no administrators. Earth sent a single diplomatic observer to each of the 47 systems with a message that said, in its entirety, you are free. We are not your liberators, you did that. We are simply noting it officially. Elder Tellys received a copy of that message on the day it went out. He was sitting in his quarters on the council station. He was always reading something, and the message came through on his personal terminal, flagged as a courtesy copy from the Earth delegation. He read it once. He sat for a while. He opened the drawer of his desk and took out the physical data card he had carried for 287 years, the one he'd held up in the council chamber. The one with page 3 on it, the one that no one had read. He turned it over in his hands. The casing was old enough to have a specific smell, the particular dry mineral smell of storage materials from 3 centuries ago, when they made them differently. He had been right. He had survived to see it. He was 478 years old, and he had been carrying this for 287 years, and he had been right, and the Empire had ended, and the systems were free, and the humans had not wanted any of it, just as page 3 said they wouldn't. He set the card down on his desk. He did not file anything. He did not write an addendum. He had said what he had to say in a chamber full of people who were finally 287 years late ready to hear it. He picked up what he'd been reading, a biological survey of a small moon system, nothing to do with any of this, and went back to it. At Meridian Anchor, 14 years later, the mug was still on Ren's console. The hairline crack had not gotten worse. She had been careful with it for 14 years. The letters were more faded now. Barely there, ghosts of letters. But she knew what they said, and she didn't need to read them. The station had changed around it. New crew rotations, new consoles, a full refit of Deck 7 that had taken 6 months and improved the structural integrity and made the coffee machine in the break room significantly worse. Webb had retired and moved to a coastal city and sent her a photograph of it every few months, a different angle each time, the way people do when they're trying to say something they've decided not to say directly. Reyes had made Admiral. Delara was teaching at the Fleet Academy. She still tapped her mug twice before speaking, which her students found strange, and had developed a theory about. Park had gotten married to the girlfriend on Mars. He'd invited her to the ceremony. She'd sent a card. Ren read intelligence reports at Milieu 400 and ate cold oatmeal, and the quiet around her was different now. Heavier, fuller. The way a room is heavier after it's been used for something significant, and the something significant is done. The galaxy was watching in the particular way things watch when they're trying to figure out what kind of thing you are. She didn't mind. She'd been watched before. She was 67 now. Her hair was more gray than not. The coffee had gone untouched since she set it down 11 minutes into the silence with the High Warlord, or rather, since she'd left it on the table when the escort came, and then not gone back for it. Her daughter had called last week, and they had talked for an hour about ordinary things, which was its own kind of luxury, the kind you didn't know you were preparing for until you were finally allowed to have it. She reached for the mug. The ceramic was cold, and then carried it with her when she finally left the observation room at the end of the longest day of her career, and set it on her console, and not touched it for reasons she hadn't examined carefully, because some things are better left as what they are. She drank it anyway. It was terrible. Cold and stale and 14 years old, which was not literally true. She had refilled it since, obviously. She wasn't symbolic to the point of dysfunction, but it tasted like that. Like patience and cold mornings, and the particular flavor of something you've waited for so long that tasting it feels less like arrival and more like confirmation. She set the mug down. Outside, Earth turned. The Pacific was in full daylight. She could see the specific glitter of it, the way the surface moved even from this distance, alive and enormous, and entirely indifferent to what had happened above it 14 years ago. The intelligence report on her desk was about a species on the edge of the outer rim that had apparently begun transmitting. Nothing alarming, just signals, the way species did when they started looking up and wondering if anyone was looking back. She picked up the spoon. She ate. The mug sat beside her, pale gray and chipped and faded, and the letters on it were almost gone now, and the coffee inside it was warm, and the galaxy outside was a little quieter and a great deal more careful, and she had her work to do.